Welcome to the podcast, David Crowe and Rachel Clun.
Well, I'm not going to lie. It's great to have you here in Canberra, Jacqueline Maley. Welcome to the city, and we're finally talking face-to-face instead of talking to computer screens on the podcast.
It's so nice to be here in person. It's been very frosty this week, hasn't it, Rach?
It has. It's been freezing, but it's great to be in this very cosy studio.
We are quite cosy. We are also celebrating our very own Crowe, who won a very big award this week. We had the Press Gallery Midwinter Ball here in Canberra on Wednesday night, and David was awarded the Big Journalism Prize, which is the Press Gallery Journalist of the Year award. David, congratulations. This podcast is very proud that you are ours.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I was saying to somebody earlier, getting an award like that, it's like a night at the casino because Shane Wright was commended in that award,
Yes.
and he is an equally deserving winner. So it's there's always that element of randomness to these things, but it's good to get. The Midwinter Ball was funny, wasn't it? It was a good night, but there was an element of it where it strikes me, it's still it just reminds you that there's a lot of hardship out in the real world, which we'll talk about today, and it's an uneasy time in the country, but I guess the nature of life is, hey, if you get a glass of sparkling in your hand, just enjoy it.
That's right. And there were certainly many politicians hitting the dance floor last night. We won't tell their secrets. Let's get into housing policy. Rach, I want to begin by talking about just how bad the housing crisis is in Australia right now. How difficult and how expensive is it to rent and to buy right now?
Well, Jackie, it's difficult for both if you're a renter or you're buying. Nearly 75% of renters face rent increases in the last year. That's people who had a tenancy already and people who are moving into a new place. And if you're moving into a new place, that rent increase for most of those people was more than 10%. So that's pretty significant. And rental inflation is expected to reach 8% next year, which is huge. It's a huge amount.
Yeah.
But it's also difficult if you're a buyer. Obviously, we've had 4 percentage points of interest rate rises over the last bit over a year. We haven't felt them all yet. They haven't all been passed on. And, house prices have been a little bit volatile. They peaked early last year. They've come down a bit, but new reports are forecasting them to reach new highs in the next financial year. So bad news on both sides, I think.
Yeah. Good news if you already own a house. Very, very bad news if you're trying to get into the market. Rachel, this is a diabolically complex issue and a diabolically complex crisis, but can you just talk us briefly through some of the factors that are contributing to it?
Yeah, it's a really multifaceted problem, I guess. Part of the issue is, the heart of the issue is a shortage of housing, really. So during the pandemic, a lot of people moved into smaller home formation. So if you're in a big share house, you move to be just by yourself or you move back in with your parents maybe. And I think the estimate is about 120 new households were formed during the pandemic, and that's without migration coming in.
Yep.
And we also have population increasing. So we have students coming back to Australia from overseas. We have skilled workers coming back from overseas. The other issue really is that building construction is not expected to keep up, Interest rates are hurting the construction sector. There are not enough workers and they just can't keep up with supply. Forecasts for new starts in construction are lower than they have been for a few years. So all of those things together kind of leave us with not enough homes to go around.
Yeah. So it's complex in a way, but in another way it's really not. It's just a simple supply and demand. We don't have enough houses for the population. Okay, let's turn now to the Albanese government's plan to remedy this crisis. Earlier this year, they introduced their Housing Australia Fund Bill 2023 to Parliament. It's a $10 billion fund, I think. It's received a lot of criticism from the Greens, which we'll get to soon. But first, tell us, David, what exactly is this bill and how is it supposed to alleviate pressure on the housing market?
It's meant to alleviate pressure by building social and affordable homes. And I think right from the start, we need to be really clear. The Housing Australia Future Fund is $10 billion. But what Rachel's just talked about is a huge structural challenge in the housing market. And the new fund would address part of that, but only part. It's to build 30,000 social and affordable homes over 5 years. And it does that by taking $10 billion in debt, basically, putting that in a fund and then using the earnings from that fund to invest in social and affordable homes. So this was an election commitment from Labor. They told everybody they wanted to set this up. there's debate about whether it's big enough. Given the scale of this challenge, clearly it's only addressing part of that.
Yeah.
But even that is highly contentious. The debate really crucially comes down to whether it's big enough, but also whether it really is fair enough, I guess, to put $10 billion into a fund and only use the earnings to invest.
Yeah.
The Greens would like to see either a bigger fund or more direct investment.
Yeah.
You know, why put the $10 billion in the money market to earn earnings and use those earnings? Why not just fund it directly out of Commonwealth coffers?
Yeah.
That's a central question. That's why it's being held up. The Greens are certain that they've got a better way. Labor is sticking to its guns.
Yep. So what happened this week was that the Greens and the Coalition joined together not to vote the legislation down, but to delay the vote. They've kicked it off until October. Can you tell us about that, Rachel? What we've just addressed that a bit, but what exactly are the Greens demanding? What concessions do they want in return for their support?
Well, the Greens have called this fund essentially a gamble on the stock market, right? So that they don't think this is the best way to do it. The Labor defence of that is that, well, they're setting this up so in perpetuity the government can help fund social and affordable homes. But the Greens want direct investment from the government, and they did win that point this week when Anthony Albanese announced $2 billion that would go to the states and territories to build social and affordable homes. But the other really big sticking point for the Greens, and the thing that they're not budging on, is they want rent freezes. They want their wording is a ban on illegal rent increases, so super high rent rises. What they're asking for is a 2-year rent freeze, and then they want a cap on rents at 2% of inflation going forward.
Yeah.
And the government is just not interested in a rent freeze at all. I mean, that's something that kind of deals with the pressures on renters, in terms of how much you're paying in rent. Doesn't necessarily, or doesn't address the supply issue in having more rental properties out there.
And we should mention as well that the Commonwealth doesn't actually have any power over rental increases. It's a state-based thing. I think some of the states are moving a little bit on the issue, and I think the Greens are sort of saying, well, we would like the Commonwealth government to put in place incentives so that the states will impose a rental freeze. But someone like Chris Minns, the Premier of New South Wales, has already said, no way, never going to happen.
But the Greens have said, in defence of that, have said that, well, the government was able to negotiate price caps on energy, on gas and on coal. So they should be able to negotiate with the states and territories on this, and maybe they should give them some more money in order to help them do it. And the ACT actually does have a cap on rent increases. It's CPI plus 10%. So it's not out of the realms of possibility for that kind of rent control, but I think freezes are a bit of a harder ask. Yeah.
So they basically want the Commonwealth to cut a deal with the states on that. David, how do you think the Albanese government might respond? Albanese was pretty furious this week. He had some pretty strong rhetoric against the Greens, and they seem to have opened the door towards the path down to a double dissolution election trigger over this issue, this legislation. Talk us through that.
I think it's a good idea to be sort of wary of some of the talk about a double D election.
Yep.
The housing bill has been delayed. Whether that amounts to blocking it and therefore giving grounds for a double dissolution election if it's blocked again is a question for lawyers, constitutional experts. I think at the moment it's a bit of it's clearly a standoff. In theory, Anthony Albanese could hold the line totally. Adam Bandt, as Greens leader, may choose to keep blocking this bill. That can get into a scenario next year where it may become a double dissolution trigger. That's foreseeable. That's possible. But I think going to an early election depends on a whole range of things. Is the voice going to get up or not?
Yep.
Big implications for leadership. Is the Labor primary vote going to stay as high as it is right now in the polls? All these things come into play. So I'm not getting ahead of myself thinking that there's a double D coming down the line. I think Anthony Albanese is more inclined to go for a 2025 election. But the point is, both sides think they're on a winner on housing politically. Yeah. The Greens are door-knocking on the issue of housing, on rental stress, and they think it's building their vote. And that could be true. Anthony Albanese thinks that he is holding the middle ground on housing. He's got a policy that's better than the coalition. He thinks he's right. He thinks he is right to hold the line. That may also be true. The Greens are really fighting for their 12% of the electorate. Right, so there's something in it for both sides, and that's why we've got a standoff, and I don't see a quick resolution to that.
Yeah, there's a political dividend for both, as you say, to dig in and to really make a big thing of this issue. And it's also about inner city seats, isn't it, where Labor and the Greens really face off against each other for the youth vote, for the rental vote, and Albanese's own seat is one of those seats.
Yes, and so is Tanya Plibersek's seat.
Yep.
So are the seats that the Greens have picked up in Brisbane.
Yep.
And of course, the leader of the Greens on this issue was Max Chandler Mather, who won the seat of Griffith in Brisbane from Terry Butler, Labor frontbencher at the last election. It's getting personal. I can see it in question time. I can see Max Chandler Mather ask a question and Anthony Albanese bristles at the question. When Anthony Albanese leaves question time, his body language with Max Chandler Mather says it all. He walks past and I can't hear what they're saying, but there's clearly direct tension there.
Yeah.
Max Chandler Mather is asking questions of Anthony Albanese that make it personal. He regards Anthony Albanese as a landlord, you know?
Yeah.
So,
which he is.
As are many people in Parliament.
Yeah.
It's the way they use their savings. But you can see that dynamic. And so this is why I think that Anthony Albanese is just not inclined to give the Greens a win. Like the $2 billion that he announced on the weekend, he announced it after being criticised by the Greens for months on housing.
Yep.
But he didn't do a deal with the Greens to get it done.
No.
The Greens don't have ownership of the $2 billion. It's an Anthony Albanese idea, agreed with the states and territories, and it's direct money that goes to them straight away. In some ways, it's a better policy than the Housing Australia Future Fund. It's faster, it's direct, it goes to the states. They're meant to be able to spend it, to commit it within 2 years. So, that's a different solution, and I think we'll see more of that because Anthony Albanese will want to come up with different ways to address housing where he can say, oh, thanks very much, Greens, but you haven't contributed this at all.
This was all my idea. And crucially, he announced that policy, that money in Victoria with Dan Andrews, big Labor state, big Labor event, nothing to do with the Greens. I'm interested in this issue emerging and sort of bursting open into the parliamentary debate now of housing, because housing affordability has been with us for some time. The affordability crisis has been with us for some time. I recall Malcolm Turnbull back in 2016 batting away questions about this during that election campaign, but no politician until now has really seen it as a fertile ground for a major policy announcement like this. Why are we seeing this issue having the pull that it does now? Rach, what are your thoughts?
I think it's worth looking at the demographics of it a little bit. So about 2/3 of Australians either own a home outright or, have a home with a mortgage. Another third rent. But in those inner city electorates that David was just talking about, the proportion of renters is actually much higher. So people like Max Chandler Mather, a lot of his constituents are renters. And I think part of the issue, house prices in Australia have been, pretty expensive for a long time, but renting has never been tougher. Rental vacancy rates reached record lows. They're still near record lows in a lot of parts of the country. And renters are seeing these huge price increases. So there are lots of young people who are faced with these really, really tough rental situations and not seeing any way out of it because they can't afford to buy in their local area or adjacent to their local area at all. So I think that has really kind of, crystallised the problem. And then the Greens really campaigning on it too, I think has brought it into the fore a lot more. Yeah.
Rach, I wanted to switch to something more personal now because you're a millennial, a youthful, dewy-skinned millennial. You wrote a piece for us a while back about your travails as a renter. I just want to ask you if you can take us inside the mind for people who are listening who are older of your generation when it comes to affording a home. Have people given up? Is it a major preoccupation with your generation?
Yeah, so I rented for about half my life and have had a combination of, I've had some nice landlords. I've had some pretty terrible rentals as well. And I think one of the biggest issues when you're renting and you're renting long-term is stability, especially in the Australian market. You don't have a lot of that. If you're share housing, you have none. And so you're moving pretty frequently, and you don't want to talk to your landlord about some of the issues, like if there's a leak in your ceiling, like if I raise this, are they going to kick us out? Are they going to raise rent? And so you're kind of constantly in this state of not knowing how long you're going to be where you are home-wise. And I think a lot of people have also given up on buying a home. You know, a lot of my friends have bought because they've had assistance from family, whether that assistance is just being able to live at home for a year or two to save the money for a mortgage, whether that's their parents going guarantor, whether that's their parents, you know, giving them some cash for a deposit. If you want to live in a major city in Australia, you just have to have that support.
You kind of need it, yeah.
Yeah, and so for people who don't have that, you know, family assistance or can't have that family assistance, it just leaves you in this state of, well, I'm probably going to be in this unstable rental situation for the rest of my life, which is not a nice place to be in.
It'll have major political implications, I think, as your generation ages and grows as well. David, just quickly, do you have an opinion on who has the best answer on the housing crisis? Like, not to pick a winner, but Labor and the Greens both think they have a winning strategy. Who, in your mind, is actually offering up the best solution on it?
Labor has the advantage of incumbency and the advantage of power here. They have the ability to gather different policies on a whole range of fronts. The housing accord that they can do with the states and territories, the $2 billion that they can find in a weekend, basically because the budget's looking like it's in better health than we thought only a month ago. So they're able to do that, and I think the political pressure is on them from the Greens to do more, and they will do more. For the Greens, I think it is more challenging to come up with a totally workable solution. For instance, calling for rent caps and rent freezes means they're asking the federal government to do something to force the states and territories to do something. That's unwieldy as a policy solution. We've already seen that some states simply don't think it works. They don't think that policy works.
And they've said they won't do it.
Chris Minns, New South Wales Premier, says, if I was to announce a rent freeze, I worry about what would happen in the next month with everybody jacking up rents. So there's a valid policy debate there. The Greens are doing, I think, a really exceptional job as a minor party driving pressure on this issue. But the advantage is always going to be there for a sitting government to come up with solutions, which it seems to me is very much in Anthony Albanese's own interest.
Yes, yes. It's not going to go away as an issue, is it? All right, gang, it's been such a pleasure. It's so nice to all be in the same room. It's been really fun, and we're going to have you both back on. You're both so brilliant. Appreciate it.
Great to be here.
And thanks.